it's John, and welcome to another edition of Cozy, Charming, Crazy Real Estate, where we talk about everything real estate. Today we're going to talk about dual agency, which is the situation that exists when the buyer and seller in a transaction both hire the same real estate agent to represent them. Now, this is a controversial subject among real estate professionals. A couple disclaimers. Dual agency is legal in most states. Some states it is illegal or it is very heavily regulated. So we're going to talk about dual agency, how it functions. We're going to talk about the pros and cons. And if you are not comfortable with dual agency situations, we're going to give you some tips on how to avoid it. So let's get started. So what is dual agency? Well, as we said before, it is the situation that exists when the buyer and the seller have both hired the same real estate agent to conduct a specific transaction. And to understand the dynamics of real estate and client relationships, we're going to start by saying, who is your agent in a standard situation? So we're going to start on the left. When a seller wants to sell a home, they want to hire a real estate agent. Well, in reality, the contract between the seller and the agent is not between the seller and the agent. It's between the seller and the agent's broker. In California, at least, and in many other states, real estate agents work for, they call them normally employing broker, even though the contractual relationship might be as a contractor. For supervision purposes, they call it employment. But the real estate agent works for the broker, and only brokers are licensed to conduct real estate transactions. Now, they can delegate those functions to agents under their supervision. However, there must be a broker present. So when the contract is signed between the seller and the broker, the agent will probably show up at the seller's house. They'll sign the documents together. The seller will sign on behalf of the broker. However, the broker is the party who is actually being hired. Now, we have the same situation over on the buyer side, where the buyer is going to sign an agreement. Normally, it will be a buyer's representative agreement, which basically says, hey, real estate agent, I'm a buyer. This is what I'm looking for. Go bring me a place to buy, and you get the commission when I buy it. It's the same situation with the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent works for a broker. The contractual relationship is between the buyer and the broker, but the agents are going to do all the work. As we can see with our dotted silver line, the seller and the buyer will probably never meet the two brokers. They will work just with those agents, but the brokers are the entity that is legally conducting the transaction. So let's look at our first of two dual agency situations that we're going to look at. And this is the easiest one to tell, that it is a dual agency situation, that buyer and seller have indeed hired one agent, and that agent works for one broker. And the contractual relationship is between the buyer and the broker, and the seller and the broker. But again, on the silver dotted line, the broker's agent is the one who does all the work. So in the second scenario, and this is the most common form of dual agency, and if you're in the eastern United States, you may hear this called multi-agency. We have a buyer and a seller. They each have their own agent. However, both of those agents just happen to work for the broker. Well, wait a minute. If each party, the buyer and the seller, each have their own agent, how is it dual agency? Well, because of the contractual relationship that they must have with that single broker. That makes it dual agency. And to understand some of the dynamics, that broker is not only responsible for the agents being ethical and regulatorily compliant, but that broker's job is also to teach them skills that make their real estate brokerage maybe better than the brokerage down the street. And those are very specifically how the skills of being able to market a property better, being able to negotiate better, to be more efficient in preparing and closing all the documents that have to be signed and turned in and processed, and perhaps even being more communicative. These are the things that make us want to hire an agent, and the broker is going to teach his or her agents, those things, and that's what's going to give them a competitive advantage among other agents. So the broker's job is also to answer questions, to provide recommendations to each of their agents on how to handle transactions. It's very common for an agent to go into their broker and say, I have a house I just listed, here's all the information about it, and the broker will say, well, let's talk about how you're going to market it. Let's talk about all your strategies, and we're going to get into that in a second. But the broker is not just a policeman to make sure everybody does it right. They're also looking to see that their agents do it best. So let's look at the pros of dual agency, why a buyer or seller might want to enter into a dual agency situation. Well, one of the reasons is that broker commissions may be reduced. If a broker is representing both parties, and hopefully the parties have already worked out their price and all the terms, and all the dual agent has to do is basically herd the transaction through the process. Lots of times they're going to say, well, because I'm getting 2 commissions instead of 1, I'm going to reduce my commission from both sides, so overall it saves everybody money because you're only hiring 1 broker. Another pro that some dual agents like to bring up is, well, when one agent is running everything, they don't have the possibility of miscommunication. You have one person making sure everything gets done, so it's very efficient. So those are reasons that often those real estate offices that do practice dual agency on a regular basis, they will say those are the pros. But no good deed goes unpunished, and what are the cons? And personally, these are the reasons why I do not like dual agency situations. It has nothing to do with ethics or legality. It's all about standard of care or level of service. So what are the cons in dual agency? The first one right off the bat, if you're going to list your property with an agent, you're going to list it with a strategy. You might list the price intentionally too high or intentionally too low as a negotiating strategy. And you don't want the other side to really know what you've done and why you've done it. And when you're using only one agent, well, they are the other side. You, the agent, are the other side. And so that confidentiality of your strategies is out the window. Same with tactics. Now, we can argue about what's the difference between strategy and tactics. Tactics are the actual actions we take to enable a strategy or to complete a strategy. And when we get into negotiating, this is where an agent has perhaps more skill than the guy down the street. It's why you hired him. He's a great negotiator. And some of the tactics that real estate agents use, they're not going to tell anybody about. I know personally as an agent, I do not share my strategies or tactics, even with my clients, until it's time to implement them. And then I explain them to the client and they decide whether or not they're comfortable with that tactic. A common one that we can use as an illustration here to talk about why loss of negotiating tactic confidentiality can be important is that normally we will say we have, let's say, 40 different items of negotiation within our contract. There may be more, there may be less, but let's say there's 40 just for a number. And we can prioritize those negotiating points, and we can say which ones mean a lot to us, which ones mean less. And we don't want the opposition, the guy on the other side of the table, to know which ones are more important and which ones are least important, because we might want to trade away a bunch of less important terms and conditions to gain some that are more important to us. But we want to keep those things confidential because we don't want them to necessarily know all of our important most important terms and conditions. And now some are going to say, well, wait a minute, the best way to negotiate a contract is to outright tell the other side what you want. To a degree, that's very true, and I do recommend that in negotiations. However, you don't want to give the whole farm away. Now, offer selection is where we might have a conflict of interest. For example, let's say in the two-agent scenario, both working for the same broker, the one of the other agents in the office comes in and they say, oh, I have an offer, I have an offer. Well, there might be a temptation for the listing agent or the broker to say, hey, you know, let's look at this offer first, or give it a priority, because it's coming out of the same office. It's more income for the brokerage if they get the commission from both the buyer and the seller. That could create a potential conflict of interest. Now, one that is a little more concrete and comes out without any ethics issues is closing disputes. And those would be items that come up during the escrow period where, let's say it's a subject that isn't covered well or in great detail in the contract, but all of a sudden you say, well, no, that's not what I thought. And the other side says, no, that's not what I thought. And all of a sudden we have a dispute that really becomes a negotiation. And so here we are again needing to negotiate, but our dual agents have a conflict of interest. And it's often said, well, wait a minute, you know, we're two agents, we are not communicating, we are separate, we are both advocating separately for our clients. However, back to our initial diagram where we show that in dual agency, whether it's a single agent or a double agent, there is only one broker, and that broker, their job is to help settle disputes, to advise their agents who work for them on how to settle them best, and therefore that is where we have the conflict of interest. Now, another potential issue with dual agency is buyer showings, potential for steering, and by that we mean a buyer's agent that shows only the listings that come out of their office, and they might not be willing or they will give priority to showing the buyer properties that are listed in their office so that their office can get both commissions. It doesn't come up a lot. It is considered an ethics issue, but in dual agency situations, it is more likely to happen than less likely if there is an ethics problem already. So, how do we avoid dual agency? One of the things we can do if we are a buyer or a seller is we can say, you know what, I really want an advocate who's just on my side. I want the full boat of services. I want your confidential listing strategies, your negotiating tactics, all those things. I want all that on my side. And if the other side hired an inferior agent, I want you to show your superiority and basically get me a better deal. I'm not interested in necessarily a win-win. I want to win. I hope we give enough to the other side that they stay in the deal, but I want you to work exclusively for me. And we want to be able to tell our agents that up front so they know the game. We want to define and prohibit dual agency in any agreements we sign. In other words, don't just tell them, but also put it in writing. And also not only in the buyer agreements, but also in listing agreements. Now, I have on here demand disclosure of real estate relationships. In reality, that is federal law that when you are doing any kind of a real estate relationship based on a client agent or client broker relationship, you are required to disclose who you represent as an agent, whether you represent both sides, one side or whatever, but you do want to make sure that you get that in writing. Again, it is federal law that brokerages must disclose any conflicts of interest or representations or relationships even with any other parties in the transaction. So that is it about dual agency. Just to sum it up, again, my personal belief is I believe that dual agency is not beneficial to clients because you do lose the exclusivity of the representation. Therefore, there's a few services that you might not be able to get that you might otherwise get. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and make a comment below. If you like this video, please like it. And I hope you will subscribe and see us next week on the next cozy, charming, crazy real estate. Take care.